conventions. That's H.R. 359. Thanks for watching today. We'll be back tomorrow with more of your phone calls.
The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Coughlin.
Almighty God, your wisdom is profound beyond our grasp, and your love penetrates all you create to reveal your infinite beauty in everything and to everyone. Bless the House of Representatives, its members, and all who work here serving the people of this nation. May the vision of righteousness, where justice and peace reign, and where truth and true patriotism are standard, remain the constant guide in the daily labor to enact just laws and clear policies. Gracious God, in truth, we recognize that our own insights and powers are not able to right all the wrongs or find the paths to peace and reconciliation. So we turn to you, all-powerful Lord, and place our trust in your faithfulness, now and forever. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please rise and say the pledge with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 one-minute requests from each side. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the President's speech last night was long on hope and short on reality. The administration's answer to America's problems is more investments, which is a fancy word for more spending and for government control. The administration plans to freeze domestic spending, but domestic spending is already too high. Since last year, the national debt has gone up over $1.7 trillion. Once again, the administration presents an incomplete solution to America's economic problems. A spending freeze is not enough to fix the deficits or the debt. We must go one step further and actually cut massive, out-of-control government spending to get us out of this spending madness. If we cut spending, then we need to also cut taxes. Putting money back in the hands of American people is both the proven way to stimulate the economy. We must cut taxes and spending to reboot the American economy. We need less spending, fewer taxes, and less government. Congress needs to deal in reality, not hope. And that's just the way it is.
What purpose, gentleman from Illinois, rise? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the President gave a great speech last night. In it, he mentioned the word jobs 31 times. He used the word innovate 11 times, but he didn't mention the word unemployment a single time. That's because creating jobs is different than ending unemployment. In America, capitalism and entrepreneurship have created great things and great wealth. To name a few, the automobile, the personal computer, the airplane. It is my hope that the cure for cancer will come from an enterprising entrepreneur. But there's one persistent problem that innovation has not solved: unemployment. As FDR said, necessitous men are not free men. So I challenge our leading innovators to help find a way to eliminate unemployment, since Democrats and Republicans have run out of ideas. Mr. Gates, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Zuckerman, Mr. Iamelt, Mr. Mulally, put your organizational genius, your job-creating skills to use so that our nation can be free from the threat of unemployment. But don't give us ideas that have been tried before, because none of them have eliminated unemployment. Our task as leaders should be to end the scourge of unemployment once and for all, so that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness can really be available to all Americans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What purpose, the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute, advising consent.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, on an early morning last month, over 70 Christians in Iran were suddenly arrested and detained by the Iranian authorities. As these Iranian Christians were taken to a notorious Tehran prison, one married couple was forced to leave a 2-year-old child behind. Another mother was taken while breastfeeding her baby. 11 were released after hours of harsh interrogation. The fate of the others remains unknown. According to some reports, they are suffering through sleep deprivation and blindfolded interrogations. They're likely to face charges of proselytizing, a death penalty offense in Iran. The peaceful worship of these Christians poses no threat to the Iranian government, and the government's persistence in accusing its own population of being enemies does nothing to strengthen the regime. We stand with these oppressed Christians and other religious minorities in Iran that face constant harassment and potential prosecution. Most of all, we call on the Iranian government to release those prisoners so they can raise their families and peacefully practice their faith. Mr. Speaker, why would a government that claims to be so powerful be afraid or threatened by such a small, peaceful minority? I yield back.
What purpose, the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
I ask permission to address the House for one minute and to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, it is with great sadness that I rise today to pay tribute to a community giant, Mr. Doc M. Brown, a very special friend who passed away on yesterday. As a lifelong resident of Weldon, North Carolina, Doc Brown was an undeniable force who dedicated his 81 years to serving his community and as a champion for education. Doc Brown was a veteran of the Korean War, teacher, principal, county and town commissioner, state legislator, 50-year deacon at First Baptist Church in Weldon, and much more. He was a true public servant with a legacy that will live on through the many people he inspired over the years. I ask my colleagues to join me in recognizing the life and work of Doc Montero Brown, and to join me in praying for his wife Helen and his entire family and community during these difficult times. Thank you. I yield back.
What purpose, the gentleman from Florida rise?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I represent a Gulf Coast district in Florida, so the safety of our coastlines is critical. It's of the utmost importance to me. I'm troubled that Cuba is moving ahead with plans to drill oil 50 miles off Florida's coast. Florida doesn't allow drilling within 125 miles of our shores. So why in the world we allow Cuba to drill even closer? Cuba's rig, built by the Chinese, would even drill deeper than BP's rig that exploded a year ago. And if there was a spill, they claim it'd only take 3 days to get to our shores. Whose problem does it become then? Let me guess, America's problem. I have introduced legislation to stop this project. I hope my colleagues from both sides would join me in this effort to protect our coast. I yield back.
What purpose, the gentlelady from California rise? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of a truly remarkable constituent of mine, Mr. Jack LaLanne, who passed away this past Sunday. Known as the godfather of fitness, Mr. LaLanne opened his health club in Oakland in 1936. For over 30 years, he starred in the Jack LaLanne Show, encouraging all Americans to eat healthier and to exercise. Today, as our country faces an epidemic of obesity, we know that Jack LaLanne's emphasis on physical fitness and healthy eating made him a man truly ahead of his time. In addition, he accomplished many remarkable feats over the course of his life, such as swimming handcuffed from Alcatraz to Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco in 1955, completing 1,033 push-ups in 23 minutes on TV in 1956, and swimming the Golden Gate Channel, towing a 2,500-pound cabin cruiser, 1957. Jack LaLanne used to say, "I can't afford to die, it would wreck my image." But I think we can all agree that his image is intact and his influence on our nation's health will continue for years to come. He's survived by his wife of over 50 years, Elaine, and 3 children, Dan, Yvonne, and John. Thank you, Jack LaLanne, for all you have done for the health of this country. I yield back.
For what purpose, the gentleman from South Carolina rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in honor of a grassroots movement that is currently taking place all across our great nation, the celebration of National School Choice Week. In many states across the country, events are being held to promote school choice as a common-sense idea that gives every parent the power and freedom to choose what's best for their children's education. Here in Washington, D.C., we've seen the positive impact of injecting free market principles into the educational system. While the previous Congress chose to side against innovation, I sincerely hope this new Congress will see fit to remember that every child is important and that every child learns differently. Across this nation, we are seeing proposals for school choice expansion in places like Wisconsin, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, and others. In my home state of South Carolina, I'm pleased to see that legislators in both chambers and on both sides of the aisle have introduced a bill that would give opportunity to all children in South Carolina to attend the school of their choice. It is imperative that we empower parents with the ability to choose the best educational experience for their child, whether it's public, charter, private, or home school. May God bless our children, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.
For what purpose, the gentlewoman from California rise? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, less than 3 weeks ago, a horrible tragedy in Arizona gave our nation pause. All Americans were horrified at the news that Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, her staff, and constituents were shot in an appalling act of violence. Some people lost their lives that day, even more were hurt. And our friend Gabby now faces a long road to recovery. But some good came out of all of that horror. Ordinary Americans risked their lives to help those in need. Violence was denounced from the left and from the right. And members of Congress pledged to not let this tragedy keep them from meeting with their constituents. To honor Gabby, the other Tucson victims in our great democracy, I've introduced a resolution today that designates the first Saturday in January as National Congress on Your Corner Day. We cannot allow one single gunman to alter our representative form of government. In that spirit, I will be holding a Congress on Your Corner in my district this weekend, and I know that when Gabby is fully recovered, she will do the same. To honor all those affected by the Tucson tragedy, I urge support of this resolution. I yield back.
For what purpose, the gentleman from California rise? Without objection. Speaker, last night President Obama said that the U.S. stands with the people of Tunisia and supports the democratic aspirations of the people. That has not always been true, however. We've stood for far too long with the undemocratic and the dictatorial Ben Ali, the president of Tunisia. And it's time that we stand, as the President said, with the people of Tunisia now and support their democratic aspirations. The U.S. gets another chance to stand with the democratic aspirations of another people, the people of Egypt, against the autocratic and dictatorial and undemocratic leadership of Hosni Mubarak. For too long, the U.S. has stood against the people of Egypt, seeking a more democratic country and a more democratic government. Every election has been rigged by the Mubarak government, and the state emergency power laws have been extended so the people would be rounded up, so his viable opponents would be thrown into jail and political parties would be outlawed. The time has come to stop this. The time is for the United States to tell the Mubarak government that this election has to be free and open. The sole purpose of the election cannot be to pass on a great country to the son of the current leader in spite of the democratic aspirations of the Egyptian people. For what purpose, the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, we have to confront the fact that our government spends more than it takes in. That is not sustainable. Every day, families sacrifice to live within their means. They deserve a government that does the same. Those are the words that were stated less than 24 hours ago, at 9 o'clock last night, by the President of the United States. And I have to say that truer words have never been spoken. And we, Mr. Speaker, when Ms. Fox calls up this rule, will be proceeding with the first modified open rule for debate in 4 years, and we will be putting ourselves on a path towards reducing the size and scope and reach of government so that we will send a signal out there that job creation and economic growth can finally get moving. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose the gentlewoman from North Carolina rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 54 and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 5, House Resolution 54, resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 359 to reduce federal spending and the deficit by terminating taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided among and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Ways and Means and the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on House Administration. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule for a period not to exceed 5 hours. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. No amendment to the bill shall be in order except those printed in the portion of the congressional record designated for that purpose in Clause 8 of Rule 18, and except pro forma amendments for the purpose of debate. Each amendment so printed may be offered only by the member who caused it to be printed or a designee, and shall be considered as read. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion, except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
House Resolution 54 provides for a modified open rule for consideration of H.R. 359, which is a bill to reduce federal spending and the deficit by terminating taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions. Mr. Speaker, it is refreshing to stand before you in a House dominated by a new Republican majority focused on changing the direction from the failed liberal policies that have dominated Washington for the past 4 years. Although there remain some obstacles to realizing the full breadth of a Republican agenda so desperately needed to pull our economy out of the doldrums, it is indeed a new day. This rule provides for consideration of H.R. 359, legislation authored by my friend Mr. Cole that I have co-sponsored, as it represents a small step towards a brighter future for our country. Instead of considering legislation providing a perpetual spending increases as the solution for all that ails us, in a departure from Washington groupthink, H.R. 359 would actually reduce federal spending, Mr. Speaker. Although this concept may be foreign to many liberals and other Washington Beltway insiders, it's what Americans expect out of the new Republican majority they recently sent to represent them here in the People's House. Instead, H.R. 359, which CBO estimates would save $617 million over 10 years, eliminates an expensive federal program that wastes taxpayer money funding presidential campaigns and national party conventions. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for yielding time. I rise in opposition to the proposed rule H.R. 359 to terminate the presidential election campaign fund and the ability for taxpayers to designate $3 of their federal tax liability for financing of presidential election campaigns. This week, Republicans have engaged in what amounts to a shifty attack on a program that successfully limited the influence of corporations and special interests in our presidential campaigns, tilting the playing field further in favor of multimillionaires who can and often do spend their own money. Just as poll taxes and literacy tests prevented poor people and minorities from voting, eliminating this program will place those without the multi-million-dollar political clout yet another step away from having their day in a presidential race. This program allows every tax-paying American to voluntarily check a box. And I think I should reiterate here, the individual opts in to this program on their 1040 to put $3 in the presidential election campaign fund. A married couple has the option of $6 if filing jointly. Checking the yes box does not increase the amount of taxes an individual owes, nor does it decrease any refund to which he or she is entitled. In establishing the checkoff program, Congress left the single most important decision to the taxpayer. The taxpayer, not the House Republican leadership, decides whether he or she wants $3 of their taxes to be used for the presidential funding program. The choice is theirs to voluntarily check yes or no. And I might add that during our hearing in the Rules Committee yesterday, several of us, including some of my Republican colleagues, indicated that they had, at one time or another, participated in this program. And yet now they want to eliminate it. Yes, this program does need improvement, but it is far from ineffective or obsolete. Since the fund's inception in 1976, every presidential candidate before '08 has used the presidential election campaign fund in the general election, and Republicans own 2008 presidential candidate Senator John McCain used it to fund his election. During the 2008 election cycle, nearly $17 million of public funds were spent for the Republican convention and an equivalent amount for Democrats. $84 million to Republicans for general election grants and a total of $18 million for primary matching funds for parties' candidate nominations. House Republican leaders have promised to bring reform and accountability to Congress. And I quote from the Republican Pledge to America, quote, "We are fighting to bring much-needed sunlight to the process." Is this the kind of reform and sunlight that you've pledged to the American people? UCUT gives Americans a choice. Really? A website where you only have the opportunity to vote yes for cutting, that is, either you support the Republican agenda or we do not care what you think. A website where saying yes to meaningful programs such as the National Endowment for the Arts, Legal Services Corporation, the Community Development Program, and a fund that was created specifically to empower presidential candidates to participate in the political system regardless of their socioeconomic status or their relationship with special interest influence is not welcome. I've said it before and I'll say it again. A more fitting name for UCUT, or the UCUT program, would be Cut You, because it hurts everyday Americans while doing little to cut the federal deficit. Simply put, UCUT undercuts our democracy. The summary's headline for the legislation we're considering today is, "In the Presidential Election Fund, Savings of $520 million over 10 years. The biased paragraph goes on to say, in short, it provides taxpayer subsidies to political candidates and parties. Not only are the summaries provided on UCUT inaccurate, they're written to elicit a specific response. We know that use of the fund has declined in recent years. President Obama was the first candidate since the fund's inception to opt out of the public financing program in the general election, and other candidates have opted out of public financing in primary elections. If candidates from major parties continue to decline public financing, then the savings from eliminating the fund could and likely will be substantially lower. Confusing you-cut voters with one-sided jargon and eliminating programs like the Presidential Election Campaign Fund are not the answers. Fixing the public financing system and paying attention to what the American people really want are the answers. What Republicans fail to mention is that the you-cut program is inherently selective and therefore biased. Neither online nor cell phone voters are able to vote to save a program rather than cut it. Furthermore, the you-cut program conveniently targets only those who have Internet access and cell phones, which disproportionately leaves out a lot of the poor and elderly. The last time I checked, an undisclosed number of votes on a partisan website does not constitute the will of the American people. Republicans seem to think that this online gimmick is an effective substitute for good governance. Now the Republicans have promised over and over again that the 112th Congress would be a new wave of accountability and transparency. And yet this, like every other major bill that has been considered thus far, is lacking in both. The Republican leadership has held no hearings or markups, failed to consider alternatives, and crafted a bill so narrow that very few amendments can even be considered germane. Mr. Speaker, this bill eliminates rather than repairs the presidential public financing system, which is, in my judgment, irresponsible and will move our nation in the wrong direction. I suggest that the next campaigns are more than likely on either side, Republican or Democrat, to cost as much as $1 billion each. The House Republican leadership has touted that they're going to change the permissive culture of Congress. Today's consideration of this legislation is evidence that the only thing House Republicans want to do is glorify the permissive culture of their own party. I urge my colleagues to instead focus on repairing the system and maintain a focus on the increasing the role of average citizens in our presidential election process, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield such time as he may consume to the distinguished gentleman from California and Chair of the Rules Committee, Mr. Dreyer.
Gentleman from California is recognized. Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and let me begin by expressing my appreciation to my good friend from Grandfather Community for doing her typically wonderful job of managing the rule. And I also want to say to my friend from Fort Lauderdale, I appreciate his thoughtful remarks. And I am somewhat dumbfounded, though, that for the first time since April 8th of 2008, I said earlier it's been 4 years, April 8th, 2008, it was a beach bill that was being considered here. We had a modified open rule. We now are going to allow members of this House to engage in a free-flowing debate. Our Rules Committee colleague, Mr. Polis, came up to me last night, right before the State of the Union message, saying that he was looking forward to offering an amendment. He told me he submitted it to the record last night. So we are going to, for the first time in a long time, allow for free-flowing debate. So I can understand why my friend might want to oppose the underlying legislation. I disagree with him, but I can't understand why in the world they would conceive of opposing, for the first time since April 8th of 2008, having the kind of free-flowing debate that both Democrats and Republicans and that the American people deserve to see their representatives have in this institution. Now, what is this legislation all about? This legislation is all about job creation and economic growth. Job creation and economic growth. And one might say, well, how is that when you're talking about the presidential checkoff? How is that about job creation and economic growth? Well, I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, Last night, the President, time and time again, talked about the importance of creating jobs, and as I said during the my one-minute presentation here, the President made it very clear that we need to make sure that we live within our means. Now, what is it that living within our means will do? We need to send a message to those potential job creators out there that the United States government is getting its fiscal house in order so that there can be a level of confidence for those businesses to create jobs. And right now, when you look at the fact that we have this $14 trillion debt, if you look at the fact that we have deficits as far as the eye can see, it's not sending a very positive signal to those people who want to create jobs. So you say, why is it we're taking on a program like this? Well, the new estimate has it from $520 million to $617 based on the new estimates. Now, a small amount of money? Of course it's a small amount of money. Why is this chosen? Well, I think that there's a reason. It's the fact that it has failed. President Obama chose to cast aside and not utilize this system when he was running for president. And John McCain did use it, as my friend from Fort Lauderdale said in the Rules Committee yesterday. And we've already had the President of the United States announce that his plan is to raise $1 billion for his re-election campaign. That would lead me to conclude that President Obama, assuming he runs for re-election, is not planning to use this fund. And let's also look at the fact that since 1980, when it was in effect, 28.7% of the American people utilized that checkoff. And today, about 7.3 or something like that percent of the American people are using that checkoff system that is there. Now, I listened to the remarks of my friend from Fort Lauderdale in which he said that the notion of getting rid of this would allow corporations to be involved in a much greater way, and he implied that there would be all kinds of corruption. No one, Mr. Speaker, is advocating that we go back to the way the campaign finance law was before 1974 and Watergate. We all acknowledge, I mean, it was a horrible, horrible time, and disclosure and accountability are very important. We have in place today, under the federal election law, limitations that exist. No corporate contributions are allowed to be made to federal candidates. No corporate contributions are allowed to be made to federal candidates. And so the notion of somehow claiming that by saving $617 million, the idea of taking that amount of money off the table and allowing people to voluntarily support the candidate of their choice is somehow going to encourage greater corporate contributions. It's against the law. This does nothing to change that. And I think that it's a very specious argument to propound something other than the case here. And so, Mr. Speaker, I will say that, again, we are going to have a rigorous debate on this. Members are going to have an opportunity to participate. And while if members do want to oppose the underlying legislation, I think that they should be welcome to do that. But I still find it very hard to believe that the majority that went through an entire Congress for the first time in the history of our republic, now approaching 222 years this spring, we saw an entire Congress have not a single bill considered under an open amendment process. And while this is not an open rule, and I'm not claiming it's an open rule, it is a modified open rule that does allow for the kind of free-flowing debate that we haven't seen in a long period of time. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to join with Ms. Fox in support of this rule, and then let's have the free-flowing debate, allow, as Speaker Boehner regularly says, the House to work its will, and then we'll have a vote. People can vote however they like at the end of the legislation, at the end of the debate. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida. Mr. Speaker, that free-flowing debate consists of 6 pre-printed amendments. 5 of those amendments are not in order. And so we're going to have free-flowing debate on 6 matters that are offered. And if what he just said is going to give the American public the impression that we're having a free-flowing debate, then I must have missed something, and
Well,
yes, I will
gentlemen,
yield.
I thank my friend for yielding. And let me just say that obviously this is a very positive step in the direction of allowing for that debate. And the fact that amendments were filed that are not germane has nothing to do with the question of whether or not, if we had 100 amendments filed that were germane, we'd have the outside time limit and an opportunity for a debate to take place on those amendments. And so, again, many members had the chance, any member had the chance, Democrat or Republican alike, to file amendments last night so that we can consider them on the House floor. And I think this is a great thing. And I thank my friend for yielding. I thank my friend for yielding.
I reclaim my time merely to point out that I don't consider 5 matters that are not in order and one that's going to be ultimately debated to be free-flowing debate. We'll get there, and perhaps we'll get there after we listen to my good friend, the former chair of this committee and the distinguished ranking member from New York. I yield Ms. Slaughter 3 minutes.
Gentlewoman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Hastings. You know, it's rather ironic that we're having this debate today, because it is almost exactly 1 year from the day the Supreme Court decided the Citizens United case. That decision opened the floodgates for anonymous special interests and for corporations to dump unlimited amounts of cash into our political system. Predictably, the result of this awful judgment was to set loose a torrent of secret money to influence the midterm elections this past November. Now my Republican colleagues propose to further erode whatever protections our government has left against a state of democracy for the highest bidder by attempting to undo our system of presidential public financing. Let's remember where this system came from. It was a direct response to the Wild West, unregulated, freewheeling campaigns that led up to the Watergate scandal. The atmosphere of that time was described by campaign finance expert Fred Wertheimer as so bad that contributors to Richard Nixon's re-election campaign were, quote, literally flying into Washington with satchels of cash, end quote. Hidden, unregulated, private money ruled. In response to that, Congress acted as much as it could to clean up that system, and we have done fairly well with that. Our democracy will not be able to afford a return to that corruption. But that is what we start today with this bill. This bill will result in even more corporate and special interest money in our campaigns than we have today, and that's really saying something. We don't even know how much money comes in from foreign money. The Presidential Election Campaign Fund is the one place in the electoral system that we take some of the pressure off of candidates who otherwise have to raise bushels of private money. For the life of me, I can't see how this bill does anything other than add insult to the injury of the terrible Citizens United decision last year. This bill will also take away from the American taxpayer the freedom to choose to support good government, to choose to support the public financing of campaigns. Republicans cite the low participation rate as a reason to scrap the entire program. I don't see the sense of that argument. The amount of money that goes into the Presidential Election Campaign Fund is directly proportional to how many people check the box on their tax form. Apparently, there is enough support for the program for American taxpayers to designate it a projected $617 million, since that's the number being thrown around here today, to be saved over the next 10 years. That sounds to me like enough support to keep the program around. Now, that is certainly not to say that this current system is perfect. It has not really been changed since the 70s. On the contrary, our current system is one in dire need of reform. As the Washington Post said in an editorial yesterday,
an additional minute.
As the Washington Post said yesterday in an editorial opposing this bill, we have a great need to rehab it, but let's fix it, don't junk it, and I wholeheartedly agree. I hope that my colleagues will look at 2 bills that are being proposed. Well, one passed last year, the Disclose Act, the second from our resident expert on financial reform, Mr. David Price, showing those that really have some discussion. This bill has been brought to us with absolutely no committee action, no hearings, no public input whatsoever. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question and to vote no on the bill. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to point out to our colleagues across the aisle who are complaining about some of the amendments being declared, proposed amendments being declared not germane, that it is not the Republicans who decide whether amendments are germane or not germane, but it is the parliamentarian's office that decides that. They can do the same thing to our amendments as well as to the Democrats' amendments. I now yield such time as he may consume to my colleague on the Rules Committee, Mr. Woodall from Georgia.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Speaker, I could not get over here to the floor fast enough when I saw this rule come up for debate, and I rise in strong support of this rule today and strong support for the underlying legislation. I'm pleased to be joined on this day after the State of the Union, not just by my colleagues, but with so many young people in the gallery today, because that is exactly what this debate is about. We've heard much talk on the floor of this House over the past week about the upcoming CBO baseline report. Well, if it arrived in your email boxes this morning like it did mine, you saw that CBO's most recent score predicts a $6.9 trillion 10-year operating deficit. That's not the $14 trillion in debt that these young people are going to have to pay back. It's the actual operating deficit, the additional debt that we're going to add over the next 10 years. This proposal today is one small step towards attacking that operating deficit. Now, we're talking about big numbers here today. Somewhere between $500 million and $600 million will be saved with the elimination of this proposal. But, folks, $6.9 trillion is where we have to go over the next 10 years. So if you think that this underlying proposal, if you think the public financing proposal has some merit, I look forward to debating that when the time comes, when we get our operating deficit under control. But we don't just need to pass this provision today. We need to pass this provision and 10,000 more just like it to get to a balanced budget. Now, I want you to think about that. All of the discussion, all of the gnashing of teeth, the hand-wringing about eliminating this provision today, folks, this is just the beginning. This proposal and 10,000 more just like it are what we need to pass in this House. The question isn't why are we bringing up this proposal today. The question is why don't we have 3 or 4 or 5 more just like it. I look forward to joining with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to talk about those provisions, talk about those spending items in our budget that we can get rid of. But, folks, I am absolutely certain, as the UCUT site pointed out when America voted, that public financing is one of the top 10,000 things that we can get rid of. We don't have to decide today whether this is number 1 of the 10,000 most wasteful programs in government or number 10,000 of the 10,000 most wasteful programs in government. We only have to decide if it's somewhere on that spectrum. I tell you that it is, and I rise in strong support of this rule. Second reason I had to rush over here to the floor. I'm brand new. Been in this House less than 1 month, and I'm down here speaking on a rule that offers an open amendment process. Now, if anybody has been watching the House floor as I have over the past 2 years, you might wonder what an open amendment process is, and you'd be right to wonder because you've never seen one. I may be a freshman in this body, but folks who came 2 years before me, sophomores in this body, they don't have any more experience at this process than I do, because this is the first open amendment process that we've seen on the floor of the House. Why are we seeing it? Because it's the right thing to do for the institution. Speaker Boehner has made a point of saying the House is going to work its will. Now, I come from a very conservative district in the northeastern suburbs of Atlanta. And I'll tell you, when the House works its will, we're not always going to get what we want in the northeastern suburbs of Atlanta, because the House sits kind of here in the middle, and I'm a little further over here on the right-hand side of the spectrum. But in order for this Congress to work, in order for this House to work, in order to restore the dignity of this House, we have to allow the House to work its will. I am just so pleased in my very first month in Congress that we not only have seen very narrowly focused pieces of legislation come to the floor, but we're seeing them come to the floor under an open amendment process. And let me just say one thing about that open amendment process, particularly for folks, again, who haven't seen one before. Folks who are in the gallery or watching on TV who have not seen an open amendment process before. Just because it's open doesn't mean you can do whatever you want to do on the House floor. We're talking about the public financing of elections today. So if you have an amendment that's going to change the way we finance education, that amendment's not going to be germane. If you have an amendment about what you want to do with the health care system, that amendment's not going to be germane. When you bring narrowly crafted pieces of legislation to the floor, the amendments that are germane are narrowly crafted amendments. And folks, I love that. For too long, we've had 2,000-page bills, 1,000-page bills that folks can't read and can't understand and that it can't be amended. And I'm so pleased today to be standing here in strong support of my colleague from North Carolina's resolution. I will be voting in favor of the rule, and I'll be voting in favor of the underlying legislation. And I thank the gentlelady for the time. I yield back.
The Chair would remind members to direct their remarks to the Chair and not to guests in the gallery. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2.5 minutes to my good friend, the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Florida for allowing me to speak on the rule, and I rise in opposition today to the rule and the underlying bill. Mr. Speaker, first it was repealing patients' rights, then it was a budget resolution with no budget. Every one of us in this chamber was elected to Congress with a goal of creating jobs and growing our economy. Yet there hasn't been any talk about that. And today the Republican leadership has brought to the floor another piece of political posturing that takes us away from the goal of creating jobs for millions of Americans and establishing economic stability and growth. Rather than wasting time bringing these bills to the floor, we should be working to develop innovative, bipartisan solutions to create jobs, reduce the deficit, and put our economy back on track. We can all agree that our campaign finance system is broken. In every election, more and more dollars are spent by wealthy corporations and special interests on campaigns. I know a lot of my friends wanted to turn the televisions off by the end of the last campaign. But ending the Presidential Campaign Fund would only further breach that trust. Recent polls have found that the public overwhelmingly believes that money buys elections, 5-to-1 in some polls, and it's no surprise because election spending has gone up 4-fold between 2006 and 2010 congressional elections. With a voluntary $3 individual contribution, the Presidential Campaign Fund is a modest part of the answer to the nation's campaign finance needs, not the problem. It's a way to include the people's voice in our government by honoring small donations and helping restore the people's faith in democracy. Nearly all presidential candidates from both parties over 35 years have used this fund as a way to reduce the emphasis on fundraising and special interests. Our democracy in its current form would cease to exist if only the rich and powerful could influence public officials. I ask you today, when the middle class is suffering and job creation is our #1 goal, why do we continue to talk about giving more power to big money contributors for presidential campaigns? After the Supreme Court's terrible decision on Citizens United, we need the exact opposite of this bill. True, reasonable campaign finance reform. That's how democracy is restored and people are empowered. The People's House should not be spending its time cutting off the connection. I asked for 15 seconds.
Gentleman, an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. The People's House should not be spending its time cutting off the connection of the people of this country to the White House. Yes, our presidential campaign finance system is broken. It needs to be repaired, not eliminated, so we can find a fair way of electing our leaders. I urge a no vote on the rule and the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to say to my colleague from Colorado, this is not cutting off the access of our citizens to the White House. Our citizens have voted in lots of different ways to express their opinions in this country in the last year or so. In November, they voted to replace our spendthrift colleagues on the other side of the aisle with people on our side of the aisle who want to cut government spending. They voted on this program by reducing their involvement in this program to a very small number. If they wanted this program, they could have continued to participate in it. They participated in the U-Cut program, which singled out this program as something that needed to be cut. We're listening to the American people, Mr. Speaker. We're doing that in many different ways. This is one of the ways because they've told us at least in 3 different ways, that they want a different kind of working going on in Washington, D.C. They don't want a lot of spending. They want us to cut back spending. And they've told us this on this program 3 different ways. So I'd like to point that out. Mr. Speaker, according to Congressional Quarterly, nearly $139 million in public funds were spent during the 2008 election cycle, including $17 million each for the Democratic and Republican conventions, $84 million to Republicans for general election grants, and a total of $18 million for primary matching funds for candidates for the nominations of Democrats, Republicans, and other parties. As is the case with so many other actions, the federal government has no business funding political campaigns, particularly while the troubled economy demands fiscal restraint. And let me point out that the way the federal government gets its money is, again, by taxing the American people, or in this case, by using funds that the people have said that could be used for it. The proposal embodied by H.R. 359 first received attention as a result of then-Republican Minority Whip Cantor's initiative dubbed U-Cut. Majority Leader Cantor is continuing this innovative effort, which encourages public participation in our wonderful American democracy. The website, located at majorityleader.gov/UCut, for the first time enables Americans to make their voices heard by voting weekly on various proposals to shrink rather than grow federal spending. As I said in my earlier remarks, this is one of the ways the American people can tell us what they think. According to the official UCUT website, the Presidential Election Campaign Fund provides federal tax dollars in the form of matching funds to candidates in presidential primaries, provided the candidates qualify and agreed to abide by certain spending and contribution limits. It provides grants to qualifying presidential candidates in general elections if they agree not to accept other contributions. The program also provides grants to sponsor national party conventions. In short, it provides taxpayer subsidies to political candidates and parties. Since 2000, some major candidates have chosen to forego public financing. While some have argued that providing even more taxpayer funding for this program might entice more candidates to participate, eliminating the program altogether would require candidates and political parties to rely on private donations rather than tax dollars. The amount of funding for the public financing system is determined by checkoffs on income tax returns, and taxpayer participation via the checkoffs has declined, Mr. Speaker, 28.7% in 1980 to only 7.3% in 2009. And that's the end of the quote from the website. Again, Mr. Speaker, the American people are telling us how they feel about this program because they're not using the checkoff. As the program grows increasingly less popular, its purpose is accordingly muddled. For example, while on the campaign trail, then-candidate Barack Obama, who portrayed himself as a longtime supporter of public financing, ultimately broke his pledge to participate in the presidential public financing system. If public financing isn't good enough for such a vehement supporter, why should taxpayers finance partisan political campaigns? That's why I urge my colleagues to support this rule and the underlying bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Virginia, my good friend Jerry Connolly.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank my good friend. Mr. Speaker, we just heard a reference to U-Cut, and that this was one of the most popular cuts suggested by people on this Republican blog. Well, Mr. Speaker, 10 million Americans want to participate in public financing of presidential campaigns. And I would dare say that dwarfs anything we've heard from U-Cut. So if we're going to get in the business of what the American people want and how they've expressed themselves, 10 million voices are in threat of being silenced today by this rule and the underlying legislation. The idea that we're going to save money and solve the deficit by eliminating public financing of presidential campaigns is fallacious. But I will give the other side credit. It is intellectually honest. When you have a Supreme Court ruling like Citizen United that fosters anonymous financing of campaigns, no wonder you want to delete public financing of campaigns. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, my friend of long standing, Mr. Pallone.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't like to reference the Republican chairman of the Rules Committee, Mr. Dry, because he did leave the floor, but he made a couple statements that I have to comment on. First of all, he said that this Republican initiative is about creating jobs. Nothing could be further from the truth, in my opinion. I've watched as the Republicans have been in office now, or in the majority, I should say, for about 3 or 4 weeks, and they're not doing anything to create jobs, and this certainly doesn't create jobs. And then Mr. Dreyer said that there can be no corporate contributions under the current law. Well, the Citizens United case clearly says that there are unlimited corporate contributions, and that's the problem. Rather than having public financing of campaigns, which this legislation would eliminate, we're going to have more and more corporations just spending millions and millions of dollars to finance campaigns. And that's what this is all about. This is the Republicans basically catering to special interests and the large corporations who will spend unlimited amounts of corporate money on campaigns and not having, in this case, a public financing component through voluntary, largely small donations. Now, I have to say, this is a system that we have now that's been in place since Watergate. It was a reform that Democrats and Republicans used, a reform of a very bad system that the Watergate scandal, showed was not the way we should go. And I agree that the system needs to be updated, but it should be changed to meet the needs of today's elections that are costing more and more primaries, and the focus should be on small donations, not getting rid of small donations. But what we see instead is the Republican majority eliminating the system altogether and making presidential campaigns more susceptible to what I call outside influence. We saw the effect of Citizens United case in the past election, where corporations and special interests poured money to sway the elections in their favor. With disclosure requirements almost non-existent, we have no way of knowing whether foreign corporations or entities were contributing to the elections, and we have to question whose side the new Republican House majority is on. Unfortunately, it appears that this is just another attempt by the Republicans to support their special interest friends and big corporations who've had an unfair and undue influence on our electoral process.
Gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think that the American people are buying these tired arguments that our colleagues across the aisle are using about us wanting to be the tools of corporate interest. That is not the issue here. The issue here is that the public has said in at least 3 different ways, as I said before, that this program is not worth continuing. My colleague from Virginia said that we're denying 10 million Americans the opportunity to participate in donating to campaigns. That isn't true. Individuals can donate to any campaign they want to. So these American people who are now doing the checkoff can easily write a $3 check to the candidates of their choice. We're not stopping that in any way whatsoever. What we are doing is saying we don't need to be supporting political conventions primarily and candidates. They're perfectly capable of raising the money directly from the American people. And what we are doing, though, is saying that $617 million is real money. Our colleagues across the aisle don't think $617 million will put a dent in our debt and our deficit. That shows you how far away from the American people they are. They don't think of $617 million as significant. Mr. Speaker, the American people think that $617 million is significant. They want us to cut spending wherever we can, and this is a program that has long ago outlived its usefulness. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Dr. Fox, I'm prepared to close. I have no further speakers.
I thank my colleague from Florida. We can close, too.
All right.
Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I'm one of those people among the 10 million that did do the checkoff of $3 for publicly financed presidential campaigns and to support the national parties' presidential campaigns and to support the national parties' conventions. I feel very strongly that my $3 now is directed in a way that I did not wish that it should be directed. I do urge my friend from North Carolina to understand that at least one member on this side clearly understands that $617 million is a whole whale of a lot of money. To some of us, $617 or $67 is a whole lot of money. That said, what is balanced here is whether or not we should try in this institution to eliminate the kind of corruption that comes by virtue of a flood of dollars going into campaigns. To correct my colleague from California, and I wish he were here, I would yield to him to respond. When he cites to the fact that no corporate dollars can be contributed to the respective candidates who are on the ballot, he's absolutely correct. That is the law. But under the aegis of the Citizens United decision, corporations and individuals can contribute anonymously to any campaign, and we saw evidence of that on both sides. Now, I've seen every iteration of reform during the last 50 years in the United States of America. Some of it was good, and some of it didn't achieve its mark. This particular measure had some limitations, and at the very same time did permit people like Eugene McCarthy, Jimmy Carter, Pat Buchanan, Pat Robertson, Jerry Brown, Jesse Jackson Sr., just to mention a few, and more recently, my good friend, Dr. Ron Paul, gave them an opportunity to put forward their ideas, and the argument is that they can go out there and raise the kind of money that would allow for that to happen, I think is specious at best. For most candidates, public funding from the Presidential Election Campaign Fund has been the source of sorely needed funds at crucial points in presidential races. To make matters worse, as has been pointed out by Ms. Slaughter and myself and others, the legislation we're considering today is a repeat of the disastrous Citizens United decision, which on January 21st, 2010, unleashed massive corporate influence buying expenditures in our national elections. In the face of the first anniversary of Citizens United, we know for a fact how essential it is to repair the presidential public financing system and provide presidential candidates with a viable alternative for financing their elections, as opposed to having to depend on influence-seeking big donors, lobbyists, bundlers, and corporate spenders. We cannot eliminate the corruption of our political system when we are eliminating a program that was created to try to do that. Mr. Speaker, a vote for this legislation is a vote for big corporations and big private money to fund the election of their desired candidates. The presidential public financing system needs repairs, but eliminating a program that works, that is voluntary, and that gives a voice to the American people is not the answer. Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I'll offer an amendment to the rule to provide that immediately after the House adopts this rule, it will bring up the Disclose Act with the same text as H.R. 5175 from the 111th Congress as it passed the House on June 24, 2010. This Republican proposal to eliminate voluntary public financing for presidential elections is, in my view, a step in the wrong direction. When presidential campaigns stop receiving this clean money, they'll have to go after private contributions instead. That's going to mean more time spent talking to special interests and the powerful, and less time spent talking with the voters and communities and groups that have good ideas and real problems to discuss, but don't have multi-million dollars to donate to a campaign. Is that really what we want for our constituents? I'm confident that the answer is a resounding no. Make no mistake, this will affect the quality of our campaigns, and it will affect our democratic process. We should be considering real campaign finance reform like the Disclose Act. That bill would establish disclosure requirements for election-related spending by corporations, unions, and other organizations. And I might add, Mr. Speaker, it was a measure as offered in the previous Congress that did go through regular order, did have substantial committee hearings, and was presented to the Rules Committee, as opposed to this measure that has had absolutely no hearings and just comes here direct to the floor under the rubric of a modified open rule. And it would require this disclosed measure any person or organization making so-called independent expenditures over $10,000 to disclose them within 24 hours. That's what we need after Citizens United, not politicians spending more time and energy to raise big money. The Disclose Act would put a check on donations by federal contractors and prohibit contributions and expenditures by foreign-controlled domestic corporations. And among its other provisions, for example, is a prohibition on recipients of TARP funds from making contributions or expenditures. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question. And, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question so we can debate and pass real campaign finance reform today.
That objection